It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Recently got back from BajaCon. It is a moderately sized conference in Canada, just over the border north of Detroit, and absolutely fantastic time. All the speakers were fantastic and wonderful. I used fantastic too many times this morning already, but really enjoyed the conference, really enjoyed the location. I just wish it was maybe longer so we had more time together. They put in so many great speakers just back to back to back that you end up, just your day is scheduled and planned. So that's great, but it's also, you want to spend time with the wonderful people that are there, not just the speakers, but all of the guests. Everybody is so much fun. What a very enjoyable conference. I hope they continue this every year. It seems like they will. I think this was the third one. So check it out for next August. I don't know if it'll be in August, but probably that's the time of year. It's a great time of year to go to Canada. Way better than January, by the way. But check out BajaCon for next year, and maybe you can go. Let's see. Before I forget, coming up in the show, we drove, my wife and I, the Ioniq 6 from Orlando to Chicago, 1,150 miles roughly, and I have a segment talking about that, so I don't want to go over all the details here because it's in the segment. I also have two segments inspired by listener emails, so of course you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and ask your question or questions, and I do have others that I still might get to. It is joyfully at this point, I have enough listeners and I get enough emails that sometimes I get more emails than I can respond to or do a segment for the show. I think I can still answer everybody, but if I don't, I apologize, and or you can send me a reminder email. I will not be offended by it. Anywho, these listener emails, this time there's two of them. One is an update with the fiduciary rule and how it applies or won't apply to things like annuities and life insurance. The U.S. government, the Department of Labor, the SEC, other agencies are trying to create a situation where the average person is protected from a salesperson, aka an agent or advisor, air quotes up, and that they would have to act as a fiduciary. You think this would be straightforward, but it's not. Someone who works for a registered investment advisor, like I work for and own Polaris Financial Planning. Polaris Financial Planning is the registered investment advisor. I am an investment advisor representative. And so in that scenario, Polaris and Phil have to act as a fiduciary. It's not that fucking hard, right? But it does require an ongoing long-term relationship with clients, which may be too hard for some people or really hard for people that want to wait and work for several years before they can start really making money doing this. The quick and easy way is to sell an annuity. You can get employed, you pass a licensing exam, and then you sell annuities, and you might make 5, 10, or even 15%, I've heard, commission on annuities. So if someone comes to you with $1 million, you could make $150,000 in a one-time transaction. That's very tempting for someone to want to do. I'm not interested in it, even though it sounds like a lot of good money, because I feel like I'd be put in the position where I'd have to recommend something that I don't think is not in your best interest. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the industry don't know the difference. They don't know how these things work. They don't have to know how all of these things work. They have to sell. And if they can sell, they can make tons of money if they're successful at it without really knowing the other choices, the other possibilities, how the expense structure works. They don't need to know that stuff. They just need to know, and they need to be successful at selling. That's what they get paid for. So a segment on where we are with fiduciary rule and what may or may not happen. Another segment on cash on hand. So someone asked, well, Phil, how much cash should I have? Great question. We're obviously not going to do that here because there's a whole freaking segment on it. In just a few minutes, you can do that. Other things in the news, a temporal thing, which sometimes I like to avoid, sometimes I include them. Trump is still running for president, but it seems like at this point, either he can't tell the difference or he actually wants to sabotage his own campaign. If you've not seen it, look up the tic-tac inflation example. Absolute comedy gold, although I do think he's being serious. He doesn't understand what inflation is. He just doesn't. It doesn't affect him. He's got tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions. I don't know. Maybe he does. But anyway, his tic-tac, the little candy, the little mint. He did a commentary on Tic Tacs and held up these teeny weeny little Tic Tacs. And you'll get a kick out of that. And all of the crazy stuff that he's doing. Fingers crossed a few months from now. By the way, my show is not tied to a 501c3 charity organization. In that kind of an organization, they can't suggest who you should vote for. I'm not bound by any of that. So don't fucking vote for Trump. Vote for Kamala Harris. Yes, that's right. I'm giving you specific political recommendations. You know, if you have more conservative leanings, whatever the fuck that means nowadays, because the best I can figure, it just means you're going to vote for Trump and obey his commands. So maybe I lose a few listeners with this one. Honestly, don't give a fuck. So, anywho, we're going to wrap up this intro segment, take a quick break, go into all of the fun stuff about long-range driving of an EV, current progress or lack thereof on fiduciary rule, and how much cash you should have. Whew. It's going to be a long but fun show, and hopefully you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side.
Section 11. Inspiration. Not before about the 3rd century was it claimed or believed that the books composing the New Testament were inspired. It will be remembered that there were a great number of books, of Gospels, Epistles, and Acts, and that from these the inspired ones were selected by uninspired men. Between the fathers there were great differences of opinion as to which books were inspired, much discussion, and plenty of hatred. Many of the books now deemed spurious were, by many of the fathers, regarded as divine, and some now regarded as inspired were believed to be spurious. Many of the early Christians and some of the fathers repudiated the Gospel of John, the Epistle to the Hebrews, Jude, James, Peter, and the Revelation of St. John. On the other hand, many of them regarded the Gospel of the Hebrews, of the Egyptians, the preaching of Peter, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Pastor of Hermas, the Revelation of Peter, the Revelation of Paul, the Epistle of Clement, the Gospel of Nicodemus, inspired books equal to the very best. From all these books, and many others, the Christians selected the inspired ones. The men who did the selecting were ignorant and superstitious. They were firm believers in the miraculous. They thought that diseases had been cured by the aprons and handkerchiefs of the apostles, by the bones of the dead. They believed in the fable of the phoenix, and that the hyenas changed their sex every year. Were the men who through many centuries made the selections inspired? Were they ignorant, credulous, stupid, and malicious, as well qualified to judge of inspiration as the students of our time? How are we bound by their opinion? Have we not the right to judge for ourselves? Erasmus, one of the leaders of the Reformation, declared that the Epistle to the Hebrews was not written by Paul, and he denied the inspiration of 2nd and 3rd John and also of Revelation. Luther was of the same opinion. He declared James to be an epistle of straw and denied the inspiration of Revelation. Zwinglius rejected the book of Revelation, and even Calvin denied that Paul was the author of Hebrews. The truth is that the Protestants did not agree as to what books are inspired until 1647 by the Assembly of Westminster. To prove that a book is inspired, you must prove the existence of God. You must also prove that this God thinks, acts, has objects, ends, and aims. This is somewhat difficult. It is impossible to conceive of an infinite being. Having no conception of an infinite being, it is impossible to tell whether all the facts we know tend to prove or disprove the existence of such a being. God is a guess. If the existence of God is admitted, how are we to prove that he inspired the writers of the books of the Bible? How can one man establish the inspiration of another? How can an inspired man prove that he is inspired? How can he know himself that he is inspired? There is no way to prove the fact of inspiration. The only evidence is the word of some man who could by no possibility know anything on the subject. What is inspiration? Did God use men as instruments? Did he cause them to write his thoughts? Did he take possession of their minds and destroy their wills? Were these writers only partly controlled, so that their mistakes, their ignorance, and their prejudices were mingled with the wisdom of God? How are we to separate the mistakes of man from the thoughts of God? Can we do this without being inspired ourselves? If the original writers were inspired, then the translators should have been, and so should be the men who tell us what the Bible means. How is it possible for a human being to know that he is inspired by an infinite being? But of one thing we may be certain. An inspired book should certainly excel all the books produced by uninspired men. It should, above all, be true, filled with wisdom, blossoming in beauty, perfect. Ministers wonder how I can be wicked enough to attack the Bible. I will tell them, this book, the Bible, has persecuted even unto death the wisest and the best. This book stayed and stopped the onward movement of the human race. This book poisoned the fountains of learning and misdirected the energies of man. This book is the enemy of freedom, the support of slavery. This book sowed the seeds of hatred in families and nations, fed the flames of war, and impoverished the world. This book is the breastwork of kings and tyrants, the enslaver of women and children. This book has corrupted parliaments and courts. This book has made colleges and universities the teachers of error and the haters of science. This book has filled Christendom with hateful, cruel, ignorant, and warring sects. This book taught men to kill their fellows for religion's sake. This book funded the Inquisition, invented the instruments of torture, built the dungeons in which the good and loving languished, forged the chains that rusted in their flesh, erected the scaffolds whereon they died. This book piled faggots about the feet of the just. This book drove reason from the minds of millions and filled the asylums with the insane. This book has caused fathers and mothers to shed the blood of their babes. This book was the auction block on which the slave mother stood when she was sold from her child. This book filled the sails of the slave trader and made merchandise of human flesh. This book lighted the fires that burned witches and wizards. This book filled the darkness with ghouls and ghosts, and the bodies of men and women with devils. This book polluted the souls of men with the infamous dogma of eternal pain. This book made credulity the greatest of virtues, and investigation the greatest of crimes. This book filled nations with hermits, monks, and nuns, with the pious and the useless. This book placed the ignorant and unclean saint above the philosopher and philanthropist. This book taught men to despise the joys of this life, that he might be happy in another, to waste this world for the sake of the next. I attack this book because it is the enemy of human liberty. The the greatest obstruction across the highway of human progress. Let me ask the ministers one question. How can you be wicked enough to defend this book?
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Well, we finally did it. We had a really long drive in our Ioniq 6. We drove from Orlando to Chicago, roughly, 1,150 miles. We decided to do it over 2 days. We have in the past, on occasion, but only in gasoline cars, driven the entire thing in 1 day. It's a brutal 1 day. It is, depending on the time of the year and the day and when you hit Atlanta and Nashville, it is about an 18 to 19 hour drive, and it usually takes us 19 to 20 to 21 hours to do. I don't think it's taken us 20 hours to do. We leave, at 5 in the morning, if possible, and we get to the other house in 12:30, 1 in the morning. So that'd be about 20 hours. Yeah, maybe 19 to 20 hours. So it's a long, tough thing to do. And we had originally planned to fly this trip from Orlando to Chicago. And thankfully, a week out, we had changed our mind and decided, let's do it. We're going to take the car. And the reason was we were planning to fly on Wednesday, the day that the Hurricane Debbie was in Florida. So thank goodness we changed our flight. And then we decided we were going to drive Tuesday and Wednesday. But by Sunday, it became clear that we should get the fuck out of town. Not because it was particularly bad in Orlando. It wasn't. I think we ended up getting 6 hours or 6 inches of rain. But I didn't want to drive up towards the Florida-Georgia border during or immediately after 6, 9, 12 inches of rainfalls, because who knows what kind of weirdness can get in your way where maybe a road is flooded that you didn't expect it to flood. Maybe a side road is flooded and now there's dramatically more traffic on the road, or it's just raining really hard and a 3-hour stretch of your drive turns into a 7-hour stretch of your drive. So we got out just in advance of the rain, and so that was absolutely fantastic, and I'm glad we were able to make that out. And of course, now the storm has gone through Georgia and the Carolinas and up the coast, and I hope everyone is okay. And it's one of those things that these things might get more frequent and might get more bad because of the amount of heat energy in the Gulf and in the Atlantic right off the southeast United States because of global warming, global climate change. My 2 cities that I predict will make a difference in the psyche of the American mind for the global warming, climate change deniers. The 2 cities that I think are the most likely to do it, because it didn't do it when it happened in New Orleans. Nobody cared. I mean, really, come on, let's be honest. Nobody cared. The 2 cities I think that are going to have just an absolutely catastrophic failure are going to be either Miami Beach or Houston. And Houston already has regular flooding problems, but if a hurricane now, a Cat 4 or Cat 5 goes in there and just dumps rain, it's going to be epically bad. And the same thing with Miami Beach. More storm surge problem there, and it's one of those things that in Florida, sorry, my aside, because it's supposed to be about the car trip, but the problem with global warming and global sea level rise is not water coming over Florida, it's coming under Florida. So as the sea level rises a few inches, the water is more likely to the ocean water back up into the land under the state of Florida. And it causes endless problems with polluting well water, making it brackish, corroding the rebar inside of concrete, all kinds of weird things. Anyway, the car. So we got in the car, we took off, and we went from the Orlando area all the way up past the Georgia state line to the city of Valdosta. I think it's Valdosta. Yeah, but Valdosta. If I say it wrong, correct me. I apologize. But Valdosta, 200 miles, 3.5 hours. Had a little bit of a delay, which actually helps your range. And we still had 25% of the battery left. So we probably could have gone another 40, 50, 60 miles to the next charging location. But we needed a break. 3.5 hours of driving is a long time to be in a car. And we stopped there. And the beautiful thing about Valdosta is there used to be only one place to charge a car at very high speeds. Now there's two. We stopped there. The next stop, about 2.5 hours later, was a Buc-ee's. That's right, Buc-ee's. If you are not in the South or the Southeast, you don't know what this thing is. Buc-ee's is a mega store gas station kind of thingy. It is ridiculous. It is wasteful. It is packed with overweight Americans eating all kinds of food, buying all kinds of shit that they don't need to buy. These places can have 30, 40, 50, 70, 80 or more gas pumps. Absolutely ginormous. 100,000 plus square feet of shopping, a dozen different types of foods that you can eat, and all kinds of schlock, all kinds of tourist stuff. And of course, things like beef jerky, fudge, just it's Americana on steroids. And it's amazing and kind of revolting all at the same time. The only reason I stopped at the Buc-ee's, and matter of fact, several of our stops were done intentionally. I did not use the Electrify America charging network, which is free to me, but I wanted to try out and be able to talk about from a point of actually having used these locations, other charging stations. Buc-ee's has a deal with Mercedes-Benz, and probably half of Buc-ee's locations now have chargers. This one originally, I think it had 4 connectors. It now has 10 connectors. This is not only does Buc-ee's just snap a finger and it got done, but a few months later they upgraded it to 10 chargers. There was only one other car there charging electrically, so it was open, it was fast, it was easy. The towers are in this location were ChargePoint 400 kilowatt rated towers that share. So you can actually, more and more are going this way where 2 cars can hook up to the same piece of hardware. There's just 2 cables, because some of the older ones might have 2 cables because they were worried about the cables going bad. But in this case, 2 cars can charge off one giant piece of machinery. And in this case, these are 400 kilowatt that you can share. Nobody was there. I didn't need to share with anybody. I got the maximum. We plugged the car in, immediately went inside and looked around for a couple minutes, went to the bathroom, walked back outside. And by the time we got out of the store, 22 minutes had passed and I unplugged the car. So how much time extra did I spend charging the car? Zero time extra, because the 22 minutes were fucking around in the store and going to the bathroom and waiting in a little bit of a line for the bathroom in the store packed with people. Matter of fact, I think I can make an argument that in this bizarre situation, going to a Buc-ee's, which I generally avoid, it is faster to get in and out with an electric car than a gas car, assuming you go inside the store. Now, you could pull up, and if there's an open pump, pull up, charge, or get your gas 3, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever, and leave. But if you want to go inside, you have to stay at your car because there's hundreds of people in line sometimes to get gas at these places. And if you don't wait in line at all, and you might have to, but if you didn't have to wait, you pump the gas, then you get in the car, and then you got to go park it in this massive parking lot that is bigger than most super Walmart parking lots. And you go park the car, and then you go walk inside, and then you're going to spend more than 20 minutes. You're going to spend the 22 minutes like I did before you can get back to the car. So you actually had to get in line, wait, get the gas, move the car, park the car, walk inside, spend 20 minutes. You would actually spend more time than I did getting electricity. So there's an example where it was faster. It's weird, but it was faster. The first day, the total amount of time charging was probably 55, 56 minutes. And that's because we filled up before we stopped in Chattanooga at our hotel because it did not have overnight charging. And I didn't want to get up when I only have 30, 40% electricity in my car. I wanted to have pretty close to full. So we charged before we got there. Didn't have to. And if you had found a place that had a charger at the hotel, you could have just pulled in and plugged in overnight, assuming someone else wasn't using it. We also stopped at a Pilot gas station. I've talked about these before. We found one that was right on our path. We went to a Flying J location, and both Pilot and Flying J are the same company, and their deal is with EVgo charging network and General Motors. So all those companies' names are all over the equipment. One of them we pulled up to actually had a canopy, like a normal gas station should. It has a canopy. And so it wasn't raining, but if it was raining, you could get out, plug in your car, and not be in the rain. And of course, it's at a nice big Pilot or Flying J where you can go in, do your shopping, use the bathroom, get an overpriced Coca-Cola or Monster, whatever it is you're going to get. And one of them actually had a Denny's. Not the first day, but the second day we actually stopped at another place to eat food, even though we didn't have to or need to. We were in a hurry because we broke it up into 2 days. The second day, it was probably another 45 minutes of charging. So the total time charging over the 18, give or take, hour driving was about an hour and 30, hour and 35 maybe. Absolutely amazing. And for our driving style, the electric car took no extra time at all compared to gasoline because we stop. We stop to go to the bathroom. We stop to walk 5 minutes, maybe here or there. If you just want to talk about just going straight out hardcore, 6 hours, pee for 2 minutes, and then another 6 hours, and then another 6 hours, and you're assuming your car can get you 350, 400 miles on gasoline, no electric car can compete with that. At least not for that distance of a drive. Maybe the Lucid Air could do it up to 400 or 600 miles, but on 1,150 miles, gasoline is faster by a few minutes if you're a road warrior. But if you're a normal human being and you're worried about your bladder, or you're worried about blood clots, or you just want to stretch your legs every 2 to 3 hours, a car like the Ioniq 6, and there's others like it that can charge really fast, that have a pretty good amount of range, where you can go 2.5, 3 hours. If I get the smaller wheels, which I probably will at some point in the future, which extends your range because it's more efficient, 3.5 hours per leg of your drive. And then your charging time is 15, 18, 20, 22 minutes for a longer charge. It's on par with driving gasoline. So the people that are complaining, maybe they haven't tried a faster charging car, because if you take something which is a wonderful car like the Mustang Mach-E, it's not going to do it in 15 to 20 minutes. It's going to be 30 to 40 minutes. So that's a little bit longer. My Chevy Bolt, which we traded in for the Ioniq, we spent 3 hours each day charging, not 45 minutes. So this car's ability to add electricity and drive is 4 times faster, or 1/4 the time that the Bolt took. So the Bolt was frustrating. The Bolt took some work. The Bolt took some thinking. The Ioniq 6, much less so. Additionally, in the 2 years in between us driving the Bolt and then driving back in the Ioniq 6, my estimation is that there is now at least 3 times as many chargers along the path. And what I'm talking about is along the interstate. I'm carving out places like Atlanta and Nashville because they already had many chargers, and they have even many more chargers now. And we didn't want to really get off near downtown of either city and deal with high city traffic and trying to find a charger. It's so much nicer out on the open road. The distance between chargers on average went from something like 40 or 50 miles to now probably something like 15 to 20 miles. And many of these places in the middle of nowhere, there's two places to charge, where if the one you pull up to has a line or doesn't work, there's another one on the other side of the street or on the other side of the interstate. Not everywhere, but very, very common. And or if you pull up to charge and it doesn't work or there's people there, in the past, you would have to go to the next stop, which might be 40, 50, 60 miles away. Now, the next stop might be 15 miles away. So you don't need to hold so much electricity on the lower end of your car. So we generally charged up to about 80 and drove down to 20 or 15%, not the year 2015, 15 or 20%. If it was just me, I'm a little less anxious about it than my wife. Maybe I would go down to 10% or a little less. If it was a path that I drove more often, like our Orlando to Miami, and of course, going down to Miami, you can go to 1 or 2% and still have 3 chargers within a few miles. There's chargers everywhere down there, and it's like that in California and New England. But this was a relatively, southeast, midwestern path that you could drive. That the chargers are basically now pretty much everywhere. I think, we stopped at Circle K, Buc-ee's, Pilot, Flying J, a couple of Electrify Americas. A couple of them we were just at for a couple of minutes just to see that it worked and that we had the right app. That might be the only problem, is a lot of times you got to have a different app for each network that you stop at. That'll be fixed in the future, but for now it's a bit of a problem, a bit annoying. But once you put each app on and make sure they're all connected to either your Google Pay or Apple Pay, many of them that we stopped at, particularly the newer stations, you pull in, you plug the connector into your car, and then you take your phone and you tap it or put it close to the tower in a certain spot that's marked, and it goes to the app on your phone. It knows that, at least for me, I'm hooked up to Google Pay. It's like, cool, welcome, Phil. There's about 30 seconds of communication between the charging tower and the car, and then go. So you wait there to make sure it gets up and running and starting. None of them stopped. None of the chargers we went to were down. None of them had a line. I know that can happen, and those make great stories, but the entire trip we had none of that. The only one that we had, the only one that was a bit of less than perfect, we stopped at one that was at a Walmart, and it had 2 towers that were 150 kilowatts and 2 that were 350. And my car, at least when it's low in battery, can charge up to 240 kilowatt. So we ended up getting pinched into one of the 150s because the 2 350s already had cars charging their batteries. But the 150 probably added 4-5 minutes to our stop there. Again, not a big deal. I mean, if every freaking minute matters to you, don't get an EV. At least not for long driving. Or, you know what? If you don't drive that long that often, and that's most people, get an EV. And on those rare occasions you drive 1,150 miles, rent a fucking car. As far as the price, half of what we did was free. Electrify America for the first 2 years with my Hyundai. And the other half were about $60. A year plus from now, and if I have to pay for everything, it might be around $120, which is about the same, maybe a little less, maybe a little bit more than a relatively fuel-efficient 4-door sedan might cost in gasoline. So on these high-speed, long interstate drives where you want to stop off and charge in 15 minutes and go, you are not going to save money today. They were cheaper in the past, but a lot of the new ones are coming in at and charging higher prices per kilowatt hour. I think that will get reduced in the future when there's more competition. But the thing that I want to make for sure is that these places can make money. They'll make a few pennies, 10, 15, 20 cents per kilowatt hour. But why all these service stations? Why all these fuel stations, these energy stations, these travel stations, these travel centers, whatever we want to call them, why are they now adding so many of these high-speed electric chargers? Is because they finally figured out, and there's finally enough cars have sold where they see all of the people that have to charge as customers. And they're customers who might be there 10, 15, 20, or 30 to 40 minutes if your car charges slower, and you're going to go inside and buy a $4 Coke or a $6 Monster or a T-shirt or fudge or whatever. So that is a whole new part that this was only a few locations a year ago as an idea. 2 years ago, almost no truck stops and or gas stations or service stations had EV chargers, but they're putting them in as fast as humanly possible. I've talked about Pilot Flying J. Their goal is to have 2,000 connectors, 2,000 places where people can charge cars across the United States by the end of 2024. I don't think they're going to get 2,000. I think they're only going to get 1,500. But they're going in. The number of chargers that are going in across the United States right now per week, they're being added at the rate of 250 units, 250 connectors per week. By January of 2025, I expect that number to be closer to 500 per week. It's an inflection point, and it's gotten a whole lot easier. And if you get a car with 800 volt charging architecture, something like Hyundai Ioniq Genesis, higher end Cadillacs, Mercedes-Benz, and these cars that are 80 and 100,000 all are like that. However, if you get a cheaper car like a Blazer or an Equinox or a Tesla, they're all 400 volt architecture. And so that means you're going to spend 30 to 40 minutes per stop and then be able to drive 2 to 3 hours. Still not awful, and twice as fast or half the time in total compared to the Bolt that I used to drive, but nowhere near as fast as the car that I have now. And it's one of those things that's unfortunate and kind of sad because Tesla was ahead, but my car now charges 60% faster than the fastest charging Tesla available. When you take a look at the amount of range you can get per unit of time, my car is 60% faster than the absolute fastest Tesla, and 70 or 80 or even 100% faster than some models. Tesla is stuck where they were, and their towers are only 400 volt. And so if you pull in with an 800 volt car, you might only get 50 or 100 kilowatt out of it, not the 240 that my car can take. And more cars are going to be able to charge at least part of the time, because when the battery gets 70, 80, 90% full, it gets slower. As an example, my car can go from 10% to 80% battery in 18 minutes. From 80% to 90% is 8 minutes or more. From 90% to 100% is 20 minutes. So generally speaking, and all cars are like this, you want to get there theoretically at 5 to 10% state of charge, maybe 15 or 20. And if you don't need the extra range, stopping at 70 is even better than stopping at 80. It'll make it a little bit faster. If I go from 10% to 70%, I don't need 18 minutes. I need 15 or 14 minutes. But you get to a point where you're like, I'm here, right? I'll keep charging. But once you get over 80%, it gets dramatically slower. The other thing that is a bit of a problem sometimes is that if you're charging above 80%, not only does it get slower, but it means you're there longer, and it means you're there longer making someone else wait. So if you are charging your car and you notice that someone is waiting, and unless you have a specific reason to go beyond 80%, you should probably stop and, as a courtesy to other drivers, get the fuck out of the way and go to the next stop 2 to 3 hours down the road and charge again. Every once in a while, I've seen people at 85, 90, 95%, where it's really slow. They're really not adding much electricity, and they're making other people wait. At some point in the future, maybe it won't be a problem because there'll be so many chargers, it won't matter. But for now, if you want to charge to 100% and waste your time and there's nobody waiting, go for it. I don't care. But if there's somebody waiting when you get north of 80%, move along, Go to your next stop and charge there. It makes the whole system work better for everybody. If you have any questions about EVs, of course, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. We'll go on now with the rest of the show.
Section 12. The Real Bible. For thousands of years, men have been writing the real Bible. And it is being written from day to day, and it will never be finished while man has life. All the facts that we know, all the truly recorded events, all the discoveries and inventions, all the wonderful machines whose wheels and levers seem to think, all the poems, crystals from the brain, flowers from the heart, all the songs of love and joy, of smiles and tears, the great dramas of imagination's world, the wondrous paintings, miracles of form and color, of light and shade, the marvelous marbles that seem to live and breathe, the secrets told by rock and star, by dust and flower, by rain and snow, by frost and flame, by winding stream and desert sand, by mountain range and billowed sea. All the wisdom that lengthens and ennobles life, all that avoids or cures disease or conquers pain, all just and perfect laws and rules that guide and shape our lives, all thoughts that feed the flames of love, the music that transfigures, enraptures, and enthralls the victories of heart and brain, the miracles that hands have wrought, the deft and cunning hands of those who worked for wife and child, the histories of noble deeds, of brave and useful men, of faithful loving wives, of quenchless mother love, of conflicts for the right, of sufferings for the truth, of all the best that all the men and women of the world have said and thought and done through all the years. These treasures of the heart and brain, these are the sacred scriptures of the human race.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. Go into the mailbag to talk about annuities and the government's desire to make insurance salespeople fiduciary advisors. And this has been going on for quite a long time now. I've been covering this off and on for about 8 years. And the industry keeps kicking back. And so there's lobbyist groups that are funded by companies like New York Life, Lincoln Financial, Prudential, and many other companies that don't want the government to make changes. They don't want to be required to act as a fiduciary. They want to be able to sell products to you that in some cases can pay up to 15% commission. Looking at an article from the Washington Post, unfortunately it's behind a paywall, but the emailer was kind enough to send me a PDF version of the article. And they're talking about every year $770 billion is moved from 401ks when people retire or change jobs into other accounts. Now, while I have taken the position that I cannot give you personalized specific investment advice on what you should do as an individual investor, I can tell you that for most people, rolling that 401k or 403b or even a TSP, the thrift savings plan from the government, into an IRA is a pretty darn good idea, because you can get really low cost index funds. You can have much more control over your investments, and you get a couple of things that I call clarity and granularity, which means you can see what percentage of your portfolio is U.S. stocks versus international, what percent is stocks versus bond, what percent is short-term bonds versus intermediate or long-term bonds, what percentage is junk bonds. Even in the United States, what percentage is large cap versus small cap. If you get an annuity and they just invest the money, you get what they make, and you get to keep a small part of it. I've broken down annuities in the past, and on a regular basis, Annuities, even when they invest in the stock market, the investor tends to make 3 or 4% per year net over time. That company is investing that money, even if it's relatively conservatively, making 6%. If it's invested aggressively, they're making 10%. But you're getting 3 or 4. So they often make more money on your money than you make. So that shouldn't be the case, but it is, and I don't think it's going to get any better because these companies are suing. The American Council of Life Insurers is one of these organizations. They had a quote that says, these new rules would deprive millions of customers access to much-needed retirement, financial guidance, and protected life income products. Okay, a lot of fancy words, but they're basically saying if they have to act as a fiduciary, they can't help you. Well, if their advice is so good, why do they fight the fiduciary rules? It's just absolutely staggering. Here's another organization, the Federation of Americans for Consumer Choice. Again, it's funded by companies like Prudential, Lincoln Financial, New York Life. And one of their spokespersons said, basically, paraphrasing a little bit, but I'm reading from the article, the government has never demonstrated the marketplace today has harmed any consumer. Really? I mean, maybe they're parsing words that the government has never demonstrated. That's not the government's job to demonstrate specific harm. But I sure as fuck have on this podcast. I've had people that have bought annuities that have contacted me and shown me what they've had. I had a guy contact me when the market went up 14% because of the game and the tricks and the clever math of the annuity. They made 0%. These things rip people off. Is there a possibility that in some specific scenario, a specific annuity might be right for a specific person? It's possible. I've not seen one yet. And as I talked about recently on the show, when I found someone that had access to something like 80 or 100 different annuities, and I told them they could create any fictional character that they wanted to show me how it worked, they refused to do so. So Bill Sweeney, who is from AARP, here's his quote. What they're saying is the only way they can operate is by giving you advice that is not in your best interest. If they hung out that on their shingle, sign outside of the office, no one would go to that financial advisor. They wouldn't, and you shouldn't. The previously mentioned organization, FACC, said that the government was racing to issue the regulations, while acknowledging at the same time that they've been fighting the government since 2016. So they're just saying whatever they think might stick. Unfortunately, now the courts are involved, and 2 recent rulings, and again from the article, citing the end of the precedent known as Chevron defense, he said the court should no longer defer to the agency's interpretation of a statute. So if Congress does not pass a law that specifically says you have to be a fiduciary, then the SEC, the Department of Labor, or any other agency in the government now does not have the power to say that you are required to be a fiduciary. And this is part of Project 2025's plan to dramatically curtail and limit the power and the authority of government agencies. They don't want the EPA telling you how much mercury can be in your drinking water. Congress didn't say that the FDA can control that. They can't say how much carbon monoxide should be in the atmosphere. There's so many rules and regulations that can now go to court and be challenged by businesses, and the businesses can say, hey, that's not fair to us. Our freedom requires that us to poison the water, and the government, Congress didn't specifically say that this agency could put a limit on how much pollution we put in the water. So therefore, that rule is now gone. And this is just being applied specifically to annuities here now in this case, where, as an example, the Biden administration proposed a dramatic increase in the budget for the Department of Labor so they could have agents to actually follow up on the rules that the Department of Labor has issued. And Republicans said no. And I get the desire to cut government spending. I'm all for it conceptually, but you have to do it smart. And you should do it in a way that helps individual people, not in a way that helps large insurance companies. So be on the lookout. If you go to someone to get advice, make sure they are a fiduciary. Make sure they're a fiduciary 100% of the time, because that's one of the games that brokers and insurance people might say. They say, well, we act on as fiduciaries most of the time, but there's some things that we think are in your best interest that may not qualify for that. Well, why wouldn't it? Or they'll say, when you talk to this person in our company, they're a fiduciary, but you also need to talk to this person that wants to sell you long-term healthcare insurance, which we've talked about the scam that is. That person does not act as a fiduciary. So if the organization, the company, whatever that you're working with is not a fiduciary 100% of the time, if they cannot articulate that clearly in writing, they are not a fiduciary. That's my opinion. That's not the legal opinion, but if they're not a fiduciary 100% of the time with everything they try to help you with, then they're not a fiduciary. They're playing loosey-goosey with the terms, and it just drives me nuts. So you have to use your skepticism. You have to use your skeptical powers to say, wow, why does this person so aggressively calling me and trying to tell me that my life is going to be better or that they're going to protect my income for a lifetime? How much do they get paid? You can ask them, how much do they get paid? And if they say, you pay me nothing, well, then you should leave. Because they're not doing the work for free. They're not doing it as a charity. They're getting paid by somebody. They're getting paid by the big company because they really want you to buy stuff that's shitty. Anyway, that's my rant. That's a little bit of update on what's probably not going to stick is new fiduciary rulings that would require brokers and insurance people and even tax professionals, when they give you advice, it does not have to be in your best interest. And it looks like it's going to stay that way, which I think is a stain on the industry and only bad for consumers. But there you go.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Pace e lunga vita.
Lunga vita e prosperità.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. Got another item in email from a listener, and the question is about cash. And they wanted to know, how much cash should you have in your accounts or your bank or wherever? And of course, like many things, it depends. So if you are on the younger side, 20s, 30s, 40s, early 50s, you don't really need to have much cash in your investment portfolio accounts. I normally try to keep that under 2%. I'd really like it to average a little bit below 1%. But as far as cash on hand at your bank, I do like the idea of 2 to 3 months, maybe a little bit more. It depends. So if your job is not very stable and you're the only person making income, whether it's just you or more people are dependent on you, if there's only one income, you might want to have the cash be a little bit bigger. If the job is not necessarily secure or you've only had it for a little bit, save up some cash. If there's two incomes, hopefully there's never a situation where both people lose their jobs, so you don't have to have as much cash. And of course, if you have $1 million portfolio of investments that you could go to if you needed to, you don't need to have as much cash in the local bank. So if you're one income person and there's possibility of job insecurity, maybe 4, 5, 6 months of cash is what you need. If you have two incomes and really good job security, maybe 2 months of cash on hand is all you need, because you can pay your bills every month. and then you can pay your bills for a second month. You don't want to get down to, I don't think, 1 month or less of cash on hand, where you're playing this game where you're moving money in or your check is coming in just in time so that each week or each month you can pay your bills only just barely because you just got paid. Because if something glitches, it's easy to have the start of a cascade event where you can't pay your bills. So I don't want to talk too much about bill paying, but that's some thoughts on cash in the bank. And as I said a little bit earlier, cash in the retirement account or the investment portfolio, especially for younger people, should be pretty small. Now, when you get closer to retirement, I start increasing the cushion. We'll talk more about that soon in an upcoming episode again. But as far as the part that's cash, you want to build it a little bit, but the real big change comes in retirement. So in retirement, I would like to have cash on hand on top of your bank, cash that you need, the cash flow to pay monthly bills, maybe at its minimum 3 months, but I have more often like 6 months to 10 months of cash on hand. And the logic behind that is that if something weird happens in the markets and all kinds of stocks go down and all kinds of bonds go down in money and down in value, having several months of cash on hand is pretty darn handy, because you can wait 6 months or 10 months for things to shake out without having to sell anything. It gives you a little breathing room to wait to see what corrects first or what didn't lose the most money that you can sell from. And again, if you have, on the more conservative side, 10 months of cash on hand, during those 10 months, the bond and the bond funds, the bond index funds, the stock index funds that you own, they're paying out dividends. So it might add an extra 1 or 2 months on top of the 10 that you have, waiting for you to figure out what to do next. And it also depends on how the market is doing. If you have a period of time where the market has gone up a lot aggressively, okay, I like the idea of skimming a little cream off the top, an extra 0.5% or 1.5%, and putting that in cash. Lock in that gain. If the market just fell by 50%, I'm inclined to keep cash really low, because you want to take any extra cash and invest it while things are on sale. So, in summary, of course, it depends. A younger person that has one income and doesn't have a secure job that they know is going to last for years, 4 to 6 months of cash in the bank is a good idea. If you have two incomes and really secure jobs and not a whole lot of financial obligations to other people or kids, 2 months could be a minimum that you could have on hand. Like I said, I really don't like the 1 month idea, because particularly if you've saved your entire life and you have $1 million or $3 million portfolio, I don't want you to bounce a $500 check because you didn't keep enough on hand. So 2 months cash on hand. In the retirement account, if you're young and adding money, the cash on hand can be kept really low, 1%, less than 1%. If you're in retirement, I usually look at it as 6 to 10 months of cash on hand to be able to make your monthly disbursements from your retirement portfolio to your banking account. So if you don't need any money out of there, it can be smaller. But I don't really see a need to be much bigger. So hopefully that helps somebody. If you have a question, you can send me an email to phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. I am so delighted you're still here listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Couple of updates for listeners. I have teased a few times, and at this point, it's still a tease. I have made a modification to my base template, my plan, my strategy of what to invest, where, and how to allocate things. First of all, it's not a ginormous change, and it will be in line with previous changes and allocation changes. It won't surprise long-term listeners, but I'm doing this for all of my clients first before talking about it specifically on the show. I am now probably more than halfway done, maybe 60, 65, 70% done, going through clients. There are some that have had complications. The biggest complication for most people is if the bulk of their investments are in a taxable account. Doing an adjustment and/or rebalances can be a little painful because it creates a tax bill. That's a good thing, in my opinion, because it is a sign that you've made money, right? Because if you don't have any gains, you don't have any taxes. So you've had gains, you have taxes. The thing that is interesting to me as an experiential thing, people that are closer to retirement, people that have larger accounts or have a nest egg that is pretty close to significant to everything they're going to need in retirement, generally that person understands, accepts, is more comfortable with a tax bill. And sometimes that tax bill is $20, $30, $50, $60,000 to make an adjustment. You have a lot of gains. And in the United States, when you realize those gains, you might have a tax 15% or more. If your income is really low, it could be zero, by the way. Check that out if you're in lower income tax brackets. But for most people that have a sizable portfolio, they have a good job, they're making good money, or they used to make good money, and now they're going to pay probably 15%. A few people that have really large transactions or really good income, either on their own or both people in a couple, might have to pay 20% or even more. But for most people, it's 15% on the realized gains. And so that group of people seems to be okay with it. They get it. They're into it. Where I more often have problems are with someone who is probably in their 40s. No, because if you're in your 20s or 30s, you probably don't have a big enough of a portfolio that it matters to you. But in your 40s or maybe early 50s, you weirdly find yourself in this position where you have more money than you expected. If you're really lucky, if you've worked really hard, if you've gotten a great job and a great education, and you've saved a lot and you've made good choices, you've used index funds, you could be 48 and have hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're from a family that has never had hundreds of thousands of dollars, you might rightly so feel like you're rich now, and it's absolutely fantastic. But you still might have a job that pays $50,000 or $80,000 or $100,000, and to do an adjustment in a taxable account and create a tax bill of $20,000 might seem like an ungodly amount of money you're going to have to pay in taxes on top of what you're paying for your earned income. So it's a more challenging conversation for me and for those prospective clients. I get it, but it's one of those things that for good account maintenance, rebalancing is important. It does create greater wealth in the long run if you rebalance from time to time. It doesn't have to be that often, usually once a year. I'm now in a situation because of what I'm changing that I'm doing it twice in a year, from late 23 to early 24, and now again. And I will go over that when I explain what I changed. But so that's unusual, but I get it. It can be a lot to pay, but if you're selling enough that in a taxable account that you have to have that big of a tax bill, you can set some of the money aside from the transaction so that you have the money on hand to pay the tax bill. Of course, that means your portfolio might be $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 less, but you've done really well. So you're going to have to pay that long-term tax one way or the other. The only real practical, ways that I can see of avoiding that is, one, is to give away your money and you won't have to pay any tax. And if you give it to a charity, they won't have to pay any tax either. Of course, now you were worried about losing 15% of the gains. Now you're losing 100% of all the money. But if you choose to make that gift, cool on you. The other way is far less desirable than that is death. So from an estate planning perspective, sometimes it makes sense to not diversify a portfolio with large capital gains if you have a reasonable expectation that your life expectancy is now on the short side. And I'm talking about a couple of years. So it's something that I have to talk with clients about. It's never easy, but it's something that has to be discussed. So if you have stage 3 lung cancer and your life expectancy of making it for the next 5 years is only 20 or 30%, well, now you might be in a position to not sell things in your taxable account and let your beneficiaries do that because they get a step-up basis. And so that is a way to completely avoid those gains. And this is one of the parts of our tax system that treats the wealthy better. They might have higher tiers on some things, but here is an example where you can build quite a large estate as long as the estate tax rates don't kick in, which I think is like 11 or 12 million. And you can give your stock to your heirs and nobody ever paid the tax on it. All the gains are tax-free, even in a taxable account. So something for another segment, perhaps, if you're interested. But, just one of the things I think about and one of the things I think you should know. Anywho, the market is being very exciting right now, going up and down multiple percentage points within a day. Ignore it. And of course, I'm not making a prediction for the next 12 months whether the market will be higher or lower because I don't know. However, based on historical norms for the U.S. and other countries, with some exceptions in the other countries, but for the U.S. in particular, for the last 120, 140 years, after big drops, the market goes up. Matter of fact, if you're in your 20s or 30s or maybe even 40s, the best thing that could happen to you is that the market falls by half and stays down there for many, many years, and you just keep piling money in, and it eventually goes up. If you are close to or in retirement, that sounds horrible. You don't want that to happen. But that's why you have the cushion. Again, something for a longer discussion in other places. So even though times are more exciting than maybe you want, there's a lot of concern about who might be the next president. The history says keep putting money in, keep it invested. And I'm thinking of the Billy Joel song, "We Didn't Start the Fire." If you study history, all of the horrible things that have happened over the last decades and the last 100 years to the United States, in the United States, with the participation of the United States, the market's gone up. Not in any specific short time period, even 1, 3, 5, 7, 8 years, but over 10 years and longer, it goes up. So you need to look at your portfolio as a long-term thing. Even if you're about to retire, let's say you're 65 and you're going to retire, there's a good chance that you're going to live another 20 years. You are still a long-term investor. If you want that money to go to your kids, you are definitely a long-term investor. You're doing it for the benefit of your estate, which is a next level kind of thinking thing, not just how much can I save, how much can I put away, but how do I not necessarily make the most money for me, but how do I make the most money for my estate, for my spouse, for my children, for my grandchildren, whatever it is that is important to you. Those are bigger things to think about. Anyway, I'm just rambling. Coming up in the next few months, and I'll get the dates, and maybe I can get someone from each of the organizations. The big conferences coming up are Freedom from Religion Foundation. I believe that's in Denver, Colorado. My wife and I plan to be there. And then Center for Inquiry is having CSI Con in Vegas again, which is fantastic also. And I might schedule a little something to for listeners or fans of the show to meet. We did this a few years ago, and I think this year it's in the Horseshoe Casino, which is right behind this like shopping mall outdoor area, some kind of shops. And then one nice thing about this, these aren't like Gucci shops. These aren't high-end shops. They're shops where you could afford things and buy a lot of food and alcohol. The one place that you go down the escalator out of Horseshoe. I'm pretty sure it's Horseshoe, and you turn left, and there's the fuel bar. And so a few years ago, about 25 of us went to the fuel bar, and then we went on the other side of the path, the walking aisle, whatever, hallway, outdoor hallway, to Wahlburger to eat. And so maybe we'll recreate that just for fun, and maybe a whole bunch of listeners. That'd be cool. We're like 40 or 50 people just ascend on this place called the Fuel Bar. It's pricey, but everything in Vegas is pricey. But you do get a card where you buy one, you get one free. Has to be the same drink. So they basically make 2 drinks, and you pay for 2 drinks with one price, and you get these 2 really lovely drinks. And they put a little bit of a show on where they throw bottles, spin bottles, pour liquor over their backs, all the fun stuff that makes it kind of enjoyable. You have 1 or 2 drinks, you'll feel it, and then maybe we can go eat to absorb all the alcohol. So let me know if you're interested. You can send me an email about this or other questions, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And I'm going to end it here, and I do hope to see you at some conference in the near future. Until then, ciao.